So I'm curious on, your thoughts on, we're jumping back to Catalyst a little bit. Catalyst was always an experiment, from the beginning. What surprised you about Catalyst? To me, a governance system of a decentralized protocol is one of the most complicated problems to solve. So is there anything that happened with the way users acted or, certain proposals that were funded that surprised you about Catalyst? And is there a solution for that?
Well, how quickly it grew was surprising. It went from almost nothing because you were there in the early days and you
Mm.
saw it with the rest of us to where it's at today, where there are thousands of things being
Yeah, I was in the
discussed.
podcast wars.
Yeah, yeah, I remember that with the Cardano effect and
Yeah.
the rest of the game.
Yeah, you
It
said
feels
that.
like a lifetime ago, but
It
it
really
wasn't.
does.
It
I
wasn't.
missed that podcast so much.
I really do too. They should have gotten funded. So I was surprised they didn't get funded. I was always assuming that people who had visibility and popularity would do quite well in a voting system. And it turned out that despite the fact that things like the Cardano effect had a tremendous amount of visibility and popularity, they still weren't able to get what they wanted over the finish line. And that's a very important message that if you put the right structures in place, it actually gives you outcomes that potentially are surprising. I'm a little disappointed we haven't got audit pairings figured out yet. So, especially for larger scale projects, if people are going and doing things, it's important that when you fund the project, you also fund the acceptance criteria and oversight of the project at the same time.
Mhm.
So, let's say you're going to go build Paycoin or something like that, and it has supposed to have all these great properties. Well, who is going to tell the community you've done your job? You need some other party to do that. Usually, a grant agency accesses that. The problem is that Cardano is brain dead. It's a a cryptocurrency. It doesn't have sentience. It's not an artificial intelligence. Maybe Ben will figure that out, but until singularity gets to the next level, we're gonna have to live with the fact that these are stupid systems.
He
So
told me 2 years. So
yeah, he's been telling me that for a while too.
yeah.
And I said, well, if you don't get there, can I get your hat? So anyway, when you look at this stuff, you say, okay, well, you need to have somebody who has human judgment to act on behalf of the Cardano community to do those acceptance criteria. So audit pairing, I think, is real important, especially for high complexity stuff. But all things considered, given its age, the level of progress, the amount of community things that got funded that turned into commercial projects on Cardano, I think it's wildly successful as a growth hacking engine. And what's cool is that every time a mistake is made, the community is open about that mistake. They don't go and try to sweep it under the rug and say, well, we can't talk about it. It's actually quite the opposite. They like talking about it quite a bit. Even things that they have an opinion are a mistake. Like, I'm not taking a position on it, but Daedalus Turbo is an example of that, where at least some of the community feel that this was a unnecessary expenditure and way too much given what was being proposed, and the person proposing it didn't have the reputation necessary to do it.
Mhm.
But whether that's true or not, you have to take a step back and say the fact that that conversation exists is a very healthy thing. So that self-correcting, that constant vigilance, that constant litigation of decisions that were made by the system is how a system improves itself. It's called
Yeah.
CQI, continuous quality improvement. And so I'm very glad that Catalyst is exhibiting that. There's no central authority. It's no bureau of quality that wakes up every day and does that. It's actually a very bottom-up process in that respect. And
Well, and the design was always to fund a bunch of different projects
yeah,
at the same time. And then with Pareto's principle, the 20%, or you're going to do value there. And, hopefully people hearing about Daedalus Turbo is going to make them pay more attention and, actually look through these proposals. So yeah, it was definitely, in my opinion, a good mistake to make, but a little expensive of one,
well, it's not necessarily a mistake either. The cool part about it is that the future is unwritten. And even if the initial proposal isn't where it needs to be, there's no reason the community can't come together and work with that proposal, massage it, and get it done. For example,
Yeah.
our view on it, because it took me by surprise, was that, well, if you want to make Daedalus sync really quickly, then let's try to find a way to accelerate the integration of Mithril into Daedalus. Because the way Mithril is designed is it's going to make full nodes sync at the speed of their cores. So if you have 18 cores, you can do 18 epics in parallel. And so suddenly it's 18 times faster.
Yeah.
Wow, that's incredible. He said 10x. It could be a lot more. So that's great, but maybe there's a convergence of our roadmap and his roadmap, and we can see, or maybe there's another community idea to do this. But what's great is post-funding, that conversation's continuing, and then we could potentially turn something that could be bad to something actually ends up succeeding beyond the expectations of the community. That's the cool part of Catalyst as the conversation starter, is that nothing is left finished. It's always just the next iteration and so forth. And I can entirely envision that these things can get in the right direction if they need to be.
I'm going to extend that question to the growth of this industry and, maybe with a focus on, regulation. How is the growth of this industry and, the future regulation that seems to be coming? Has that surprised you? And, what can we do to, not be regulated in a way that's harmful for our industry, especially in the United States? We have the infrastructure bill that was passed last year that states that Stakepool operators cannot perform swap transactions, and that's starting right in 2023. And there's really no way for us to account with that, without KYC. So,
yeah, bad regulation harms everybody, even the regulators who write it, because it gives them jobs they can't comply with, and it just harms competitiveness. We certainly have had a strong opinion about where things need to go, and we've shared that opinion with many lawmakers and regulators. And we go to Washington now on a regular basis. I'm starting to learn what the inside of the Capitol looks like, and I've gone from like seeing it in pictures to actually knowing what the offices of certain senators look like.
You were there last week, right?
Yeah, I was there actually just a few days ago. And then while there, we engaged and met several congressmen and several regulators, and they're productive conversations. They're tiring because there's a lot of work to do. There's a lot to say, and it's a slow, methodical process, but they're productive and positive from the perspective that everybody does want to do their job. And we have to, as an industry, admit that some things we've done are not so good. Luna existed, BitConnect existed. The government has to admit that we've done a pretty good job, all things considered, going from nothing to a $1 trillion industry in 13 years. And if this is to continue being an American industry where more than half of the ventures and jobs are in the United States, the United States has to adopt a regulatory framework that is sensible for everybody. They forget that when they say, oh, well, staking could be a security, or staking could be this, or you have this compliance requirement, those are small businesses at the end of the day, thousands and thousands of small businesses that if you plan it right and you let them grow, they can be big businesses that employ hundreds of people each. I don't think we want to live in a country that goes and destroys 500,000 jobs or 1 million jobs because of a flick of a pen, not understanding the regulatory realities of things. Nobody wants to do that. So it's important that we have wisdom in the process. And wisdom comes from conversation and empathy and information and from engagement. And we're doing our part. Others are doing their part. And I'm very optimistic next year that something is going to get passed in legislation that hopefully will improve the state of affairs for the industry. And then with that, we can start getting to the business of actually getting to the next level as an industry, getting to the 1 billion users.
So what would you say for advice for, United States Stakepool operators that cannot, classify themselves as brokers and follow these regulations starting January 1st in 2023?
Well, this is the fucked up part about how this process is working, whereas they pass the infrastructure bill and then the regulators just say, well, we probably won't enforce it. It's like immigration law. You have a clear definition of it, and then you have agencies that say, well, we think it's morally wrong, so we're not going to enforce it. Or the IRS saying, well, we know you're cheating on your taxes, but we're just not going to audit you, or something like that. Don't worry about it. In fact, they actually have an internal notion at the IRS about how much tax fraud is okay. So if it's a few $100 billion a year, it's probably okay. If it gets over 500, we really need to dial up the audits a little bit. It's like, it's so messed up that it's like, why don't you just change the law so everybody's not a criminal instead of just allowing like pseudo criminality to exist inside the environment. So I feel your pain, and I was one of the first to get really fucking pissed off when the infrastructure bill came through. And I saw Senator Toomey up there and others basically having a certain senator from Alabama, who shall remain nameless because he didn't get his military pork, basically undo a very necessary amendment which had bipartisan support. Would have passed in an ordinary Senate was a 70-30 vote. It's a very frustrating situation. So as a protocol architect, what I can do is at least try to give you guys a glass of ice water in hell. And what that means is that we can introduce concepts like contingent staking. So when somebody stakes to you, it's a multi-sig instead of a push transaction. So to accept the delegation, you have to sign it as well as a Stakepool operator. So that means you would sign it only if it had an identity payload. So you now have a KYC or acknowledgement that they're not a U.S. citizen. Because what's going to end up happening is you have to have segregated delegation. If you read the letter of the law, you have to segregate your U.S. delegations from international delegations. Internationally, you have no reporting requirement at the moment. U.S., you may have a reporting requirement. So at the very least, you need to know who's under U.S. jurisdiction and who's not under U.S. jurisdiction. The introduction of a Tala Prism and contingent staking could make that an automated process and not destroy you guys. But it's really unfortunate that this Congress decided, for whatever reason, to introduce a system that did this to an entire industry for no particular policy consideration. It's not going to increase tax compliance. It's not going to, help anybody. All it does is just burdens people to comply with an unfunded mandate that actually doesn't solve any real problems. And I think we're going to get it fixed in the next piece of legislation. It's certainly a correction for it is in the Financial Innovation Act. I think some of the other acts also have corrections for it, but it's just a mess right now.
Yeah. And, even if you can limit delegations, the issue still is, though, you can't determine what transactions you process. If 1% of the network delegates to you, you're going to process 1% of the transactions, and you can't determine whether there's a swap in those transactions. So no matter what,
transaction discrimination is starting to happen on the Ethereum side. More than half the blocks are now OFAC compliant. So if transactions are coming from jurisdictions they believe are in violation, like Russia, Iran, North Korea, I guess they can censor them now. In fact, I just tweeted something from Martin, who's a big guy in the Ethereum space, created Gnosis, and he was just lamenting over the fact that censorship-resistant Ethereum, they have to kind of just get rid of the resistant thing now, censorship Ethereum. So yeah, you certainly could do transactional discrimination in an SPO. You're not a financial institution, so it's fucking nuts. It would be like saying to a power company, hey, those electrons that are going to the pot grower versus the electrons that are going to the bank versus the electrons that are going to the hospital, you now have to know the differences there. You have to understand the kilowatts that you're selling, where they're going. And if you sell them to the wrong person, we're going to hold you guys liable. I'm sorry, Excel is not responsible for trying to figure out who's growing pot.
Yeah.
It's just nuts.
Yeah, you need some pattern recognition software.
Yeah. So SBOs can't possibly become the banker, the regulator, file a suspicious activity report or any of these types of things. You're just going to have to figure it out through another means. And it's insulting to think that they have that burden of reliability. They're not banks. They're not RAs. They're not registered financial intermediaries. It's nuts to put that on them. They're transaction processors in that respect, and they should not be treated any differently than the power company in that respect.
Yeah.